you please open up your Bibles to Matthew chapter 16. Matthew 16. We will begin in verse 21. But I would like to share with you just some of the context before we read. Jesus is asking his disciples, who do men say that I am? And people are aware of him, but not sure who he is, what's going on. You know, some are thinking John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, one of the prophets. Some are not really sure who he is, but they're aware of him. Peter responds, and this is kind of a moment of glory for Peter in a certain way. He gives the right answer, because we all know that Peter didn't do that very often. But this time he did. Knew that Jesus was the Christ, Son of the living God. Jesus says a few things pertaining to that. Very well known, verse 18, I say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Not long thereafter is our text. We have a brief interaction between Jesus and his disciples, and then Peter steps up and starts to say something once again. So we're going to read that story now. Verse 21 through 23. From that time forth began Jesus to show to his disciples how that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed and be raised again the third day. Then Peter took him and began to rebuke him, saying, Be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not happen to you. Verse 23, but Jesus turns to him and he says, Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are an offense to me. You are not concerned about the things that are of God, but the things that are of men. Oh, man. God has a way of giving us brief moments of glory or helping us feel good here and there, just like he did with Peter here. And, you know, it was Peter's response, and I'm sure Peter kind of puffed up his chest just a little bit. He was human after all. But then, not long thereafter, we have this story coming up where Jesus prophesies. He tells him exactly what's going to happen to him. Peter thinks, well, hey, this is my chance to protect my Jesus. This is an opportunity for me to show him how much I believe in him, how much I care about him. And later on, we know Jesus says that Peter says that he would lay down his own life for Jesus. Now, he wants Jesus to know that he's going to take this serious. And the surprise, the shock that may have happened, I'm sure if you are a Christian, like really, truly a Christian, you've had that moment. When you thought you knew, you had no idea. You thought you were on the right path. Boy, I'm telling you, God says, no, you're not. And he makes sure to set you on the right course to make a shift. And he does so in many different ways. That's a lot about what this lesson is going to be about. But the main thing I want you to focus with me on right now is verse 23, the last half of the verse where Jesus says, you are not considering the things that are of God. You're not thinking about godly matters here. You're not concerned about what my Father wants and the eternal things and the things that are of heaven. You are actually in the wrong place. You're thinking about things that pertain to this life. You're thinking about this flesh. You're thinking about, what you're going to do and my safety in this life and what's going to happen with my safety and all these things, which Jesus isn't at all telling him that, safety isn't important and all those kinds of things, but he knows Peter's heart right here, and he's able to pinpoint what Peter's doing and where he needs to make a change. So for us today, for us right now, I want us to think about that statement that Jesus makes as he is getting Peter to understand and to be a little bit more mature in his faith, in his understanding, and in the way he views that which is around him, views his life and the life of Jesus for that matter. Whenever we look at this existence that we call life, that's what we call it. We call it life. We're breathing. Our heart's still pumping. Our eyes are all open. We, just like the wise man said in Ecclesiastes, the eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. The clouds go to the mountains, and it snows, and it reserves a little bit of water, and then when spring comes, we all have some fresh water, and that it just cycles. And we call that life. And we have learned as people how those cycles work, how it happens, and how we can survive as a result of these things. And we are just surviving sometimes. And then there's money, something that man came up with. I'm not really sure the history of money, a couple of weird things if you actually go and research it. But we need money to survive, and so that's part of life. We got to have that. There's so many things to think about when it comes to life. But every now and then, you get a little bit dark in your thinking, right? Every now and then, you start thinking about things like pain and suffering. Every now and then, you ask yourself the question, why am I me? You ever wonder? Why did God, of all eras and all bloodlines and in all circumstances, decide, behold, there will be one named Dave. He will be born in 1985. And he will be in California, America. Why not France? Why not put me in Islam? Why not allow me to be one of the people that was born into slavery? Why not put me in some other situation? Why am I me? And when we think about the fact that even at this exact moment, there are people going through immense pain and suffering. And when we do that, it causes us to question life, to question things, to question God's purposes. And then when we look at the way the Bible moves and the structure of the scripture and the story of the Jewish nation and how the Jewish nation moved throughout history in different ways of, captivity, out of captivity, captivity, out of captivity, over and over and over again. And we try to stop and think about all this. What was God doing anyway during this whole time? Where was he? Why was he allowing all this to happen in this way, And we kind of have to come to this inevitable conclusion, and it's something that we don't understand. It's something that we have a hard time figuring out. Well, it seems like, and this is kind of my tentative conclusion, I'm going to present it to you and offer it to you, these thoughts in some of these scriptures. And you take it, and then we, of course, always want the Holy Spirit to guide our thinking on whatever it is that we're thinking about or doing. But when it comes to matters of the flesh, God can get kind of cold sometimes. God can get really neutral, and he can seem almost as if he's indifferent about what's going on in the lives and in the affairs of men in the flesh. Some people will never even see the light of day. Why? What's God's purpose? What's he doing about that? Some people right now, as we speak, are being screamed at by the people who love them. Right? You know, some people, whenever we really stop and think about what's going on in the world, there's probably somebody right now who wanted to get up and make it to worship, but someone was screaming at them and is controlling their life instead. It's either happening right now or it's happened before. I mean, it's probably happening right now. Why does that person have to have that lot in life? Why does that person have to be called into that position? And we ask the question, why did Jesus have to die? What kind of a plan was that? Jesus was in heaven. You can know for sure that he had a very mature understanding of what he was about to do when God was going to send him to earth. But the dialogue that happened between, now there probably wasn't a dialogue, they already knew what was going to happen. Jesus already knew the grand plan and the whole scheme of everything. But of course, we people have to interject our own thoughts. And here's what the dialogue looked like, right? The father says, son, you're going to earth. And it's going to be miserable. Well, why am I going, Dad? To die. And that's it. You're going to do some teaching and all that too, but you're going to die. And he accepted that calling. And we look at the Father's perspective. Whenever we look at it from the fleshly point of view, we have to inevitably conclude, man, God is cold. God is harsh. He seems so indifferent. In fact, it says that it pleased the Father to bruise him in Isaiah 53. He was pleased with the pain that Jesus had to go through. How can it be so cold? So neutral about this pain that Jesus had to go through, and all these other people that we think about. And ringing right now, because though the grass withered and the flower fades, the words that Jesus spoke here in Matthew 16 will live on forever. Jesus helps Peter understand and make that shift and tell him right then and there, when you start thinking about that stuff, you got to take notice, because you are more concerned about things about this life than you are about things that are actually in heaven. You are even actually convincing yourself that you are the hero right now, when indeed you're actually in the wrong place. Your mind is in the wrong place. Even we have to become a little bit cold sometimes when we have to look at that. And the skeptics will look at Christians and they will say, but so what kind of a God do you have anyway? And our answer, whenever we start to kind of more mature a little bit, we kind of shrug and say, I don't know. It just seems so cold. But we help them understand. We tell them, no, we care. But here's the thing. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take you through all the introductory remarks and all that stuff that I know that we go through and we think about it. It's a part of our mind and a part of our thought processes, even the moments of darkness. I mean, I tell you right now, one in particular that I really have a hard time with is the human trafficking culture that's happening. And if you want to have a really bad day, just research. Get online, Google, DuckDuckGo, Ask Jeeves, if that's still around, and go ahead and just type in human trafficking and what's going on. If you want a bad day, because it's miserable. Now, it really hurts to think about it. And so what do? We just have to push it out of our minds so we can, have a nice meal. It's hard, but it's a reality. We have to ask ourselves, what's the plan? What's God's purpose in all this kind of stuff? First of all, I'm going to make a statement that I believe is true. And is also, from that fleshly perspective, very cold. But I'm going to make a statement. I'm going to invite you to think about it with me. And it is that we, as humans, are merely pawns in God's grand scheme. We're expendable. That we are. This life's but a vapor anyway. That appears for a short time and quickly vanishes away. You can go ahead and tell me what you're going to do tomorrow. You have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. It could be anything. Anything can change. The whole world can change at the blink of an eye. And we get so wrapped up in ourselves and in our perspectives and on this life, we forget that fact that whatever position, whatever calling, whatever place you were born into, like I said, behold, Dave, born in California, in 1985, I was born to be somehow in God's plan, God's scheme for his purposes, somehow, some way. And so what I'm going to try to do is kind of make that case with you a little bit here today. But then, of course, the call to action is going to be, what are you going to do with that fact? You are a pawn. What pawn are you going to be? How are you going to produce something for God? And it can go one way or the other. I'm going to show you just a second here. Go with me to Genesis chapter 25. Genesis chapter 25. We are going to first take a look at the big picture. In the big picture, we have God's grand scheme being unfolded for us. It starts with Abraham around chapters 12 or so. Well, it really starts with Adam and Eve when he says that your seed is going to bruise, or it's going to, the head of the serpent is going to bruise the heel of the seed of woman. That's where it really begins. That's where it starts as far as unfolding what's going to happen. But then we have Abraham being promised, and then we have Genesis chapter 25 and verse 23. Rebecca is about to give birth to twins. And she's actually given a brief message about what's going to happen, what the fate of these two children in her womb are going to be. Genesis 25:23, and the Lord said unto her, Rebecca, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from your body. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. And you all know who that is, Jacob and Esau. Esau was the first one. He was the man of the field, and he was a hairy beast. Don't know why, but he was. He was a hairy dude. And Jacob was more of a simple man, a little more crafty. Before either of them even could see the light of day, God had decided their fate. God had decided that through one of them, his great and grand promise was going to unfold before they could even have faith, before faith was even a thing, before they could even hear the message of God. God had made a decision. Now that right there started a whole thing, a whole plan, a whole scheme, a whole nation. Jacob had his 12 sons, and thus we had the 12 tribes of Israel, and it just went from there. And God, throughout the whole time, like I said a moment ago, captivity, freedom, captivity, blessings, captivity. I mean, they would just go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But God had offered them a blessing or a curse. He told them, I'll tell you right now, in the book of Deuteronomy and throughout the law of Moses and all those places, he says, now, you guys are going to bless. Through you, There's going to be a plan, and it's going to come to pass. And you kind of decide how it happens. You decide how it plays out, whether it's a blessing or a curse. You figure that out. There was even a moment in the during like the Exodus in the 40-year period of time where they're wandering around. God said, "I'm just going to start over with Moses because the rest of you are garbage. I'll start a whole nother 12 tribes. I can do whatever I want. Wait, you want some children of Abraham? Boom, stones right over here. You want some Christians? Boom, I'll take these leaves over here and create some Christians right over here. He can do whatever he wants. He can do it because he's God. So it doesn't matter what we do, his plan will unfold. And so Esau just had to deal with the fact that, hey, I'm just like the guy who's going to stand in the background over here. And he had to make his own choices. Later on, he forgave his brother. Later on. Not everyone is born to wear a crown. Not everyone was born to be famous. Not everyone was born to baptize thousands of people. Some people were born to be in the background. Some people were born to prove that you can be born in a miserable circumstance and rise above that and find Jesus. But you have to decide how it unfolds. So Esau had to just go ahead and make his humble decision. Hey, I'm not the guy who's going to take the blessing. I was dumb enough to sell my birthright to my brother, first of all. And then, then I went hunting and came back and everything was gone. And I just had to deal with it. My brother's smarter than me. I just have to deal with that. No big deal. That was his calling. That's what God decided. Now, what about Pharaoh? What about Pharaoh? Go with me to Exodus chapter 9. Exodus chapter 9. And when you go and you read the story of Moses and the Exodus, the 10 plagues, the interactions between Moses, Aaron, and the Pharaoh, and then you read the words of God, Jehovah, and the kinds of things that he says to Pharaoh, and the kinds of things that he says about Pharaoh, and God's perspective on the whole thing. It's really quite amazing. Now, I would actually like to start in verse 13. This is just in the process of the plagues and Pharaoh and his stubbornness. It actually says in verse 12, let's go ahead and go back to verse 12, because I just want to glance at that with you. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh. And I've always tried to grapple with that. I've always wondered what that even meant, how that was to be applied, and how that fits in the grand scheme of all things. Because, I just talked about that. God's plan will be carried forth. God's plan will be fulfilled. And Pharaoh was going to play a role. Whatever role Pharaoh played, God had made his decision on the fact that Pharaoh was going to play a role. And he says that he hardened the heart of Pharaoh. Now let's go ahead and read verses 13 through 17. Read this with me. And the Lord said to Moses, rise up early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh and say to him, thus saith the Lord God of the Hebrews, let my people go, that they may serve me. For I will at this time send all my plagues upon your heart and upon your servants and upon your people, that you may know that there is none like me in all the earth. Verse 15. For now I will stretch out my hand that I may smite you and your people with pestilence, and you shall be cut off from the earth. Now watch verse 16. And for this very purpose have I raised you up, to show in you my power, and that my name may be declared throughout all the earth. I'll stop right there and think about that for a minute. Stop and think about that. Verse 12, we just read that God hardened his heart. And then God says, now I'm going to send plagues. And it's kind of neat how it says, I'm going to send plagues into your heart. Now he's going to really mess with Pharaoh. He's going to mess with him on many different levels. I mean, when it comes to the security of the whole country and their safety, even being able to see in the middle of the day, to the point that not even his own children were going to be safe. Not even his son was going to be safe. And he says, now, I'm doing this, and I want you to understand that through it all, I will be declared throughout all nations. My power is going to reign. And then he says, for this very purpose, this deed, this one thing, this is why that you even exist, so that I could show the whole world who I am. Now, what other religion has this story? What other religion has Jehovah? What other religion can anybody go back to and read about when God took the most powerful nation in the whole world and made the Pharaoh quiver on his knees, made the king just shake in his boots, show him, I got control over every little aspect of your life, and there's nothing you can do about it, except for one thing. Verse 17 addresses it. I stopped at verse 16 on purpose. You know, some of you guys like to read ahead. Come on. Hey, don't do none of that now. Verse 17, God asks a question. And yet, you exalt yourself against my people and will not let them go. He actually asks the question. Now, how does that work with verse 12, with God hardening his heart? Because free will is something that I don't believe God messes with. God could turn any of us into robots right here, right now. He can easily do that. He don't want that. He wants love. You know, he wants us to love him. He wants to love us. He wants a relationship with us. He doesn't want his relationship to be like your relationship with your phone. All you have to do is push a button and it does everything that you want it to do. We're not cell phones. We're people. Sometimes it's hard to be people. And I kind of wonder about it, think about it. It's almost like God is saying, you know, well, with the Pharaoh, I tend to have that effect on stubborn people. Like God triggered a hardening of a heart with somebody who was so proud and so stubborn that he refused to see who God is. So therefore, he had that effect on Pharaoh. But through it all, we have in this story a little bit of a message, or a big message, I should say. In every single breath of life, and every single pain, and every single atrocity, and every single person who's born into a situation that is hard or difficult, and things that we can't even understand, things that we have a hard time grappling with, things that we don't understand and will never understand. There's one thing that we know. In it all, God will be glorified. And what that looks like when it's all said and done outside of this existence, oh man, it's going to be pretty big. It's going to be pretty amazing, don't you think? But if you put yourself in Pharaoh's shoes, you're going to ask the question, well, what do I have in common with the Pharaoh? You really got to stop and kind of wonder. In which way am I going to glorify God? Some of the wickedness that took place during Jewish history was to just simply show how merciful and how good and how amazing God is. And it's hard for us to understand that and realize that. There's moments when we have to stop and notice how thankful we ought to be for where we are right now. How much gratitude we really should have. Now, I could have been that person who's born in another era. I could have been that person, but man, I really need to stop and thank God for who I am and the fact that I know Jesus. Now, how is God going to deal with those Islamic people who have no idea? He will be glorified. I can tell you that. Somehow he will be glorified. I don't have the answers to those questions, but I tell you what, I'm glad I got the God who sent his son to make sure that my sins wouldn't even be seen on the judgment day. But God will be glorified, and it's my job, my duty, to figure out which side of that glorification I'm going to be. Because God will use me as an example to show how dishonorable it is to not live the right life. How many of you here today can claim that every decision you made was fabulous? Just excellento. But you can glorify God in the fact that you're still here. You can glorify God in the fact that you made it. You can glorify God in the fact that through it all, you found Philippians chapter 4 and verse 6. Be anxious for nothing, but in all things, through prayer and supplication, let your requests be made known unto God, and the peace of God that passes all understanding will keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. You found that verse, and you finally learned how to apply it. It's like, man, I've been hearing it my whole life, but I didn't even know how to use it because I was blind, because I wouldn't use it, because I was a little stubborn, a little Pharaoh over here being stubborn, not opening up my eyes to the wisdom that has been shown to me over and over and over again. It's like, bam, finally I see the light. So that's how moment to moment we can actually find the glory of God, but sometimes just through dishonor. I'm going to talk more about that next week. Vessels of honor and dishonor. But today, you and me and here and us, I want to show you another little verse, and it's an attitude that Paul adopted. It's something that's really neat because you're going to be able to see how it fits and how it works, especially with what we're talking about right now. Philippians chapter 1. Philippians stands supreme in a number of ways. It's because every text is supreme in its own little way. Philippians is the text where Paul is able to just simply share his perspective. You know, he couldn't do it with everyone at all times. It's kind of like what Jesus said before he was about to be betrayed in the book of John. It's about chapter 16 or so, and it's his last message to his disciples. And he tells them, I have yet many things to say to you, but you cannot bear them. And that's kind of what Philippians is about, because, you know, sometimes if you tell somebody something at the wrong time, they'll abuse it or they use it the wrong way. But the Apostle Paul could just be honest and open with the Philippians because they were just doing so well. They were so strong. And this is one of the things that he does. He shares this with them. Let's begin in verse 19. Philippians chapter 1, verse 19 through 21. Paul says, for I know that this shall turn to my salvation. So stop right there. Think about that for a second. This. He's talking about a really difficult circumstance. He's talking about people who are preaching the gospel in a rotten way. You know what I mean? People are preaching the gospel. Now, we don't have details on how they're doing it, but they're doing it in a contentious way. It's like, you know, Dave 2003, when Dave used to like yell, well, I still yell and scream a little bit, but I'm a lot more, you know, like anyway. It's the way that some people use the gospel and they just slap people with it. You know? however it was, Paul says, well, I rejoice and still rejoice. That's verse 18. And then he says, but I know that somehow, some way, God's going to be glorified. You know, I know that somehow this is going to be to my salvation. Think about that. Paul is saying that the way the events are transpiring, because I believe and because my faith is in him, and no matter what, just like Jacob during the wrestling match, he said, I will not let go until you bless me. Paul says, I won't let go no matter how hard it gets. I know it's going to turn out to my salvation somehow. So that's what's happening right here in this text. And he says, through your prayer and the supply of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, now verse 20, according to my earnest expectation and my hope that in nothing I shall be ashamed, but that with all boldness, as always, so now also Christ shall be magnified in my body, whether it be by life or by death. Oh, man. No matter what happens, my decision is that God will be glorified. You know what the funny thing is? God's decision is that no matter what happens, he will be glorified. He will have his glory, no matter what. We want to make sure that we're on the right side of that glory. It's a big point in the lesson. Didn't matter how ridiculously stubborn the Jews were, Jesus still came. Didn't matter how many captivities they had to go through and how many Jews had to die because of their stubbornness in the Assyrian Empire. God still found a way to preserve the tribe, the bloodline of Judah, and bring Jesus in the first century and made sure that his plan would be carried out. God makes something crooked, you can't make it straight. He makes something straight, you can't make it crooked. No matter what, his plan will happen. We're like trying to figure out which side of that plan we are going to be on. For me to live as Christ and to die is gain. Now we take it full circle. Back to Matthew 16, where we began. We're going to read. And then I'm going to ask you a question, and it's the kind of question that is designed to just provoke thought and to make a point. We take this full circle to Matthew 16, verse 23, and then we're going to keep reading to verse 27. But he turned and said unto Peter, get behind me, Satan, for you are an offense to me. For you savor not the things that are of God, but the things that are of men. Then he said to his disciples, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Whosoever will save his life shall lose it. Whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. What is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? What shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Now watch this, verse 27. For the Son of Man shall come in the glory of his Father with his angels. And then he shall reward every man according to his works. No matter what, God just has this innate glory. You know, the word Yahweh means like self-existent, self-glorious. He doesn't need anyone or anything. He's already glorious. You know, God isn't the most powerful being in the universe, right? He is the power of the universe. Amen. So he doesn't need our glory. He is glory in the same way. So it says in verse 27 that after Jesus makes these statements, take up your cross. You want to save your life, you got to lose it. If you want to lose your life, go ahead and try to save it here in this life. You got to remember what he said to Peter just a second ago. Don't worry about this stuff, what's going on down here. God will be glorified. You just make sure you know what side of glory you're on. Verse 27, God will be glorified. And this is something that's hard to understand, but God will be glorified by those who are lost. He will also be glorified by those who are saved. But I want to ask you right now, what do you really think? Where do you think God's real glory truly is? In him losing people or gaining people? His glory is when somebody finds Jesus. I don't know why, but he cares. Like what David said, what is man that you're mindful of? God is glorified when we can find his fingerprint and acknowledge him and find that gratitude. For some reason, that makes him happy. He's glorified when we learn the lesson, open our eyes. But he's also glorified when we have to go through a little bit of pain because you tried to do the right thing and somebody mistreated you because of it. He's glorified by what you did, by what you tried. His most prized glory, in my understanding of the scriptures, is in the fact that he loved the world so much that he gave his only begotten Son. Whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. And that's where his glory really is. The whole time, when he chose the Jewish bloodline, what was it all about? Just to bring Jesus here. And he made it happen. If you have faith and you believe, he will make sure that, just like Paul said, these things will happen for my salvation. The same thing happens for us when we really put our faith into him. He works things out. No matter how many slaps in the face you need to get there, he'll slap you. And that's okay. Glory be to God for the punches in the face that I have received. You might need that slap right